Welcome back to the MovieBabble Podcast. This week you've got myself, Collin, and I'm joined by Nick. We're going to be breaking down some more WandaVision, as well as some new releases and some just fun watches that Nick in particular has been going through this past week. So let's just go ahead and jump into WandaVision. So we got the penultimate episode. It dropped. I wouldn't say necessarily dropped bombs in the way that a lot of the past episodes have, but it really painted a fuller picture of Wanda, who I think in all these movies that she's been just kind of on the sidelines, and her arcs have more served someone else than they have served her. And with this episode, we really got to spend some time like just building up Wanda, even if it was parts of her we already knew about, just in terms of plot. It really shed a lot of light on just like who her character is and why we wound up in this kind of wacky sitcom format, and just what her process has been through all this, while also kind of removing some of the guilt, and basically just like taking her through a 40-minute long therapy session. This was the longest episode so far, still not an hour like all the internet people were convinced the last 3 episodes were going to be. But it was really, really good. And I think a lot of people are like fixating on just like some of the Vision moments, particularly the post-credit scene, and like one of the quotes he had. But this was Wanda's episode and she killed it. Like Elizabeth Olsen killed it, Wanda killed it. This if it's not my favorite of the series, it's pretty close, pretty high up there.
Yeah, one of the most perverse therapy sessions ever, right? Because we just have Catherine Hahn just using all of these moments in Scarlet Witch's life for her own benefit to figure out to get more power. So, yeah, it's interesting. At first, I was struggling with it a little bit because it felt pretty similar in terms of how it shows its cards to episode 4, which I think was the one where we were shown the sword side of what's happening in Westview. So in that sense, I feel like there's kind of, right, it's these 4 episode arcs where we have all this build up, what's happening, and then, all right, let's retrace our steps and explain everything. And so we had episode 5, 6, and 7, and then episode 8 kind of go back and explain everything. So in that sense, I struggled with it a little bit. But I do agree, because throughout all of these movies, you're right, Scarlet Witch has just been there. And I do appreciate how Catherine Hahn, who's just the best. She's the most amazing thing ever, or person ever, and she just is just making fun of Elizabeth Olsen so like badly, and she even says like, "Oh, your accent, it really comes and goes, doesn't it?" Because that's been the whole critique on Elizabeth Olsen throughout all these movies, is where like that accent just is just all over the place, and at one point they just kind of like forget about it for her character, but. Yeah, I was interested. I think it was really, really interesting, and yeah, well, I think we'll get more into it later. But that Vision moment when they're on the bed together, oof, that's just really good. There's really good writing in that scene.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of this episode takes place either inside of conversations from Age of Ultron or like adjacent to what was going on in that movie. And so I've seen a lot of people on the timeline this week are like, you know what, really, Age of Ultron wasn't that bad. Like, we understand it so much better now. And so I think it also like opens up a conversation of like these later works going back and retroactively making something else better. Because we know something that wasn't actually a part of the movie then, but Marvel can pretend like, yeah, this was here this whole time. Like, Wanda's always had this nuance. Okay, it's not something that we added 6 years after that movie came out. But I do really like how personal it was. Like, we got to spend time with her as a kid, and we got to see that moment that is kind of her and Pietro's big this is why we became terrorists speech in Age of Ultron, where she's talking about how she sees the Tony Stark missile just sitting in front of them for like 2 days, and we got to see their parents get blown up, and we got to see I mean, we still really didn't see anything of what actually happened, but like when she goes and gets her powers, or turns out amplifies her powers with the Mind Stone, which is just like a big flash of CGI light. but it was still still a good character moment for her, walking up and just like embracing it.
Yeah, there's still definitely moments of emotional depth that I don't think Marvel wants to touch here because they become terrorists and then that's just like yeah, they were bad, they had a bad time in their younger days, don't worry about it, they're heroes now. And I feel like they'll just never ever want to touch that with as much depth as maybe necessary. But yeah, I do agree. And I think there was a lot of really good filmmaking in this episode as well. You think this movie starts during the Salem witch trials, which is just kind of insane. If you explained the plot of this episode and just beat by beat, you would say this sounds like a horrendous mess. But I think they blended it really nicely. There was some really slick editing moves, especially because Elizabeth Olsen, or it's the younger version of Scarlet Witch, is acting out in these scenes, and they'll do a camera wraparound, and it'll be older older Scarlet Witch reacting to this trauma that she kind of hidden down in her psyche for so long. I think there's a lot of really good stuff in that sense too. So I'm excited to see what the finale brings. It's kind of crazy to think that it's already over, but this episode was really, really good, and I'm excited to see what Catherine Hahn does and how she just chews the scenery again in the final episode. And I guess we have even more synthetic Vision. I don't know, like, is he super synthetic Vision now, or is he just regular Vision? I have many questions, and I think Marvel just keeps me on the hook of wanting more. That's how they've built this empire, I guess.
Into the Vision verse. But yeah, because we've got like that Vision reveal. So there's like actually really two Vision reveals, because you have there was like a direct scene where they're like, okay, this is exactly where the Vision that we've seen for the past 8 episodes came from, out of Wanda's brain, sort of. I still don't really understand what happened.
Yeah, I don't either. I have no idea.
And then at the end of the episode, they did some technobabble and like created another Vision out of the old Vision parts. And it's probably Ultron is what the internet seems to think. I think that's probably pretty plausible. But there's definitely two Visions. They're going to punch each other. It should be pretty great. No complaints here.
Yeah, it's going to be bad Vision versus good Vision. I hope they do since we're doing all this shticky stuff from sitcoms, I hope that the two Visions stand next to each other and they do the thing where it's like, no, I'm the real Vision, don't listen to that one. And then Scarlet Witch has to decide which one to kill. I hope that happens, because that would be the most gloriously terrible thing, but it would be hilarious.
Yeah, they did I think kind of play a little bit with the unreliable narrator shtick that we've seen, though not with Wanda, but with Hayward, who's sort of the main villain at this point. But just showing that, like, hey, Wanda didn't actually come in and steal a Vision's corpse, like she left, and so now they have the reanimated corpse Vision that, I don't know, might sound like James Spader. Like, what do they do if it is Ultron, but they couldn't pay James Spader again? Like, you just get, I don't know, who's the closest you can get to James Spader?
I mean, they paid Robert Downey Jr. $50 million to do 2 scenes in Spider-Man: Homecoming, or however much they did. So I think they can drop the bag to get a few voice lines from James Spader.
But this episode also really reaffirmed my suspicion that Agatha's not the villain. Like, I still have yet to see her do something that I'm like, oh yeah, that's pretty evil. Or especially compared to, like, Wanda enslaving an entire town of like 3,000 people. I'm still pulling for Agatha's not a bad guy. I'm feeling pretty alienated in my friend group because everyone's like, "Are you stupid?" But I still haven't seen her do anything evil. All she's done is take Wanda to therapy. I'm not.
It's true. I mean, whatever keeps Catherine Hahn around for longer is fine by me, because casting her as an ancient witch, or I guess she's not ancient, but very, very old witch, to put in all of these new iterations of the MCU is just lovely to me. That just sounds like the best thing ever, to have more Catherine Hahn showing up in all of these movies from here on out. So I hope she stays around.
Yeah, so come Friday, everyone's gonna have egg on their face when it turns out she's actually a good guy, and then she and Wanda and maybe real, maybe some like semi-corporal colored Vision beat up James Spader Vision. So
I can't wait for this episode to just age poorly when she becomes the villain, and everyone can make fun of you. But I just wanted to mention one quick thing, and I know that this line is already just captured the hearts and minds of MCU stans everywhere. But I think it's a really good piece of writing that is indicative of the episode of a whole, which is where Vision and Scarlet Witch are on the bed together in the Avengers compound, and he does the line where it's what is grief if not love persevering. It's on the nose, but it's also just really nice. It's a really sweet kind of emotional, like, I guess, text that the MCU movies don't really ever encroach on. And I mean, Paul Bettany is just really good. He delivers that line perfectly. I just think it was one of the few moments in the MCU where I was genuinely touched. I just thought it was really good. So I wanted to give a tip of the cap. I can't speak to that as well.
yeah, and I think this is where the praise for Age of Ultron comes in, because I think one of the things in that movie that works well, and that in this particular example I'd say even works a little bit better than in the original Avengers movie, is Vision's dialogue with Ultron at the end of the movie, where they're just kind of both reflecting on like what's the point of humanity, like, because they're basically the same, right? They're both androids created to blow stuff up, but he just has like, and he probably has about one every movie that the Vision's in, where I'll just like drop a pretty good line that kind of reflects on something. And you're like, wow, I didn't expect it to get that deep after I just watched a giant city fall from the sky and get destroyed with a hammer. But it happens every now and then. It's really nice when it does.
Yeah, what's the line in Ultron where he's like, I don't know, but I was born yesterday? Because talking about humanity, that was a really good line. That movie's a mess, but that was a really good line in there. And then he has the one in Civil War where he's talking about like the causality loop of when more heroes are showing up, that means that the adversary and that like the evil is just going to compound itself as well and to kind of match it. So yeah, he has this weird way of, because obviously the character is synthetic, he has a really good way of like doing these like sneakily like thoughtful, like super like intelligent, but also just kind of just smart and sweet lines in there. So Paul Bettany's low-key the MVP of the MCU in my mind. And I feel like WandaVision has kind of cemented it, because same thing with Scarlet Witch. The Vision character has kind of been a whole lot of nothing, but he's just really, really good that you kind of just don't care sometimes. But yeah, it's just the line was just really, really good. It just hats off to them.
Yeah, well, I think, Paul Bettany's been doing this as long as Downey Jr. I mean, he hasn't had to suit up for the whole time, but he's been around since 2008. And even as Jarvis, he would drop just like little bits like that. And when he was just like a disembodied British voice. So I'm really hoping that they find a way to bring Vision out of this. And I mean, he's a robot who is currently alive twice in the MCU, so I would like to see more of him going forward. But
yeah, but to circle back to this, I will never get on the train of, okay, now Ultron is good, or all these other movies are better now, because the MCU is like, no, just kidding. All this depth was there this entire time. Like, I will never do that. I'm never getting on that train. So sorry, MCU stands.
Yeah, I think retroactively, like adding context to movies, and I think you see this a lot with the Star Wars movies, where with like 4, 5, and 6, like, oh, well, you see the way that Han looks at Chewie and then Chewie looks at Luke is actually because in the prequels, and then there's like there's all sorts of these insane conspiracy
it's ridiculous.
theories. Or they do it with particularly with Revenge of the Sith after the Clone Wars show came out. They're like, the internet is just littered with like love for the prequels because of the show, which I think the show's pretty solid. And I think if you try to force it into Revenge of the Sith, it's like, yeah, it gives it more depth, but it wasn't there in 2005, so you can't be like, I love Revenge of the Sith because of all these things that didn't happen in this movie. And
Yeah.
I think the same thing applies to Age of Ultron here. Like, yeah, it's nice that we're getting things more rounded out 6 years later, but that doesn't mean that Age of Ultron is somehow magically like, it was here all along. This isn't like in the movies where the girl takes off her glasses and you're like, wow, Age of Ultron.
Age of Ultron is the 90s rom-com of Marvel movies, where she was the nerdy girl that was attractive this entire time. Yeah, it's just an excuse for bad screenwriting. Like that, like Age of Ultron is a mess of a movie, so I don't really I can't remember the last time I watched it, honestly. So I can't say that WandaVision is making that movie better, because it'll always be a turd. So
We'll always have WandaVision. But yeah, so this coming week is the finale. Should be pretty explosive, should be pretty well rounded. Like, I think this has been a very solid TV effort so far. As long as they don't Luke Skywalker it, like they did with the Mandalorian finale, then I'm gonna be satisfied with this little 9-episode limited series.
yeah, and then we'll have Falcon and Winter Soldier, which kind of just looks like Bad Boys, which sure, I guess that sounds kind of fun to me. I guess I'll keep watching. The mouse still has my money.
But yeah, that is Disney Plus. And then we'll move on to some very, very lower tier works that also debuted, not from the House of Mouse. Although the House of Mouse is mentioned in the one I'm going to talk about. But Cherry and Tom and Jerry also released this week. And Cherry was under review embargo for a while, and then when it lifted, it just got destroyed. And I think Tom and Jerry was pretty much the same place, but everybody seemed a little happier to destroy Cherry, whereas Tom and Jerry, they're like, I don't want to have to say this, but
Yeah, I saw Cherry, which I think is in limited theaters. It started on Friday at limited theaters, and I think it comes to Apple TV Plus on March 12th, I believe. But this movie's really bad. This movie is straight buns. Like, it's one of the more like impressively bad awards, like hopeful movies that I've seen in a really long time. I would put this in the same category as your Collateral Beauties, and just like those really awful movies that try to be about a lot of things but are just like fall flat on their faces. But yeah, this is Tom Holland and the Russo brothers teaming up once again, trying to get away from Avengers and Spider-Man and whatnot, and trying to do this really grimy, grisly movie about the opioid epidemic, which I think it was based off of a book by Nico Walker, which was like a really big deal when it came out a few years ago. But it's based on his life, and he was over in the Iraq War, and then he came back and he became addicted to pills and started robbing banks to kind of fuel his addiction. And it's this really harrowing, sweeping story about kind of like the pitfalls of America. And you can kind of get the sense that the Russo brothers see the importance in that story. Apparently they had like close like ties to the story, and it touches them on a personal level. But they try to make this story as big as possible. So there's like, they're doing all these crazy aspect ratio changes and all the, like, these stupid stylized things to make it feel as important as possible. And it just sucks all the humanity out of this movie. And it just makes it look ridiculous. There's a few scenes that will become memes when people see it. Although it's on Apple TV Plus, I don't know if people will see it. But there's an already infamous asshole shot that's in this movie where it's basically, I tweeted this out, but it's pretty comparable to the warden in Shawshank Redemption looking through the tunnel that Andy Dufresne escapes through, and it's when he goes to basic training, and like it's the army doctor looking in Tom Holland's ass. It's one of the most ridiculous things you'll see in a movie in a really long time. And then when he goes to rob banks, like the name like of all these banks are changed. Like instead of Citibank, it's Shitty Bank. Like, get it? Because capitalism. So this movie, it just takes like the worst smash your face in with a hammer like approach to all of its like ideas that it has, and it just robs it of any possible power it could have. Because I think there is like a another universe where this movie is a really interesting and big deal, and kind of is like a big sweeping epic on the line of like Goodfellas and all these other really like kind of like damning American stories. But it just takes those stylistic ideas and brings no ideas to them. So I guess this is my warning for all of you: don't watch Cherry, or just watch the memes when they come out, because there's going to be a plenty. Because this movie tries some things that are just hilariously bad. They're really, really bad. I can't like this is. It's crazy because this is the movie that the Russo brothers put on, like they put all their chips in to the middle of the table after directing Infinity War and Endgame, and they said, "Hey, we really want to do Cherry," and yeah, this movie's really bad. So, yeah, it's a mess. It's really, really bad.
Yeah, I tapped out on Cherry after I saw the poster that made the title look like Chirk, which which was roasted quite a bit and then quickly removed and updated faster than Sonic the Hedgehog. It was
so it's really stupid too, because the Tom Holland character, basically he's like a cipher for, he's a stand-in for all soldiers who come back from war. It's really stupid. Like he doesn't have a name pretty much. But the one time he's kind of referred to as Cherry is they do a terrible thing where he sees this first person die in battle. So it's like, oh, you popped your cherry. So that's his name. And that's the name of the movie. It's terrible. And I'm sure like the movie, or the book was a really big deal when it came out. And it seemed like it was very like unfettered. It had no frills. It was like, hey, this is a really tragic story that has a lot of crazy interwoven parts. And it seems like the Russo brothers took that and said, cool, I'm going to do a bunch of aspect ratio changes. You know, like it seems like, from what I haven't read the book, but from what I have read of it, it does seem like they took just everything away from the core of the story and just tried to make it this super stylized Martin Scorsese, like camera swirling all around and doing all this crazy stuff. And they just didn't really understand, or I guess maybe just not get to the point of what the story is getting at. Because it's, Tom Holland is really trying in this movie, but he's forced to deliver such ridiculous dialogue at times, and all of like the stylistic choices just make him look really weird on camera. It just makes him look ridiculous. When I feel like that he's trying, and I feel like a better movie could prop him up and make him look really good. But yeah, it's a mess. It's truly fascinating. It's like 2.5 hours. Clearly the Russo brothers had no restraints. They just made the movie they wanted to make, and it's really fascinating. But it's also one of the more messy movies you'll see. So yeah, I don't know. It's very bizarre, and now it exists, I guess.
Yeah, I don't really ever plan on getting to this one. You know, I had the choice between Cherry and Tom and Jerry, and I went with the latter. And you know, my time with it probably wasn't was about as rough, but I've seen it. And so Tom and Jerry is a cartoon that I've seen a ton of, because I watched a lot of Boomerang as a kid, so I would just like watch old Tom and Jerry reruns quite a bit. And so before I just kind of tear this movie apart, I do want to get to the animation style. Because I do really like how things are animated. So it reminds me a lot of the 2015 Peanuts movie, where everything is 3D animated and like it's updated, but it never loses that 2D feel. So it still feels true to the original work. Because the old Peanuts cartoons have a very iconic animation style, and so they found a way to update it and still be genuine with it. And I think Tom and Jerry did a phenomenal job with that as well. And if you want to see that instead of watching the movie, you can watch some test footage they did where they had Tom and Jerry dancing to Ryan Gosling's numbers in What a Lovely Night from La La Land. It is way better than the movie. It really just kind of gives you a taste for what the animators were doing. And I think what the animators did was terrific. My gripes with Tom and Jerry lie in what everyone else in the movie was doing, mainly the writers. And so I think the beauty of Tom and Jerry is that it's one of the most simple cartoon plots. Like, Bugs Bunny, not Donald, Daffy Duck, like any of the other Looney Tunes, like Hanna-Barbera-esque characters are a little bit more complex. Like they're still 60s cartoon characters, so the goals are going to be catch the monster or make Wilma not mad at me anymore. But Tom and Jerry is just cat, kill mouse. It's a very simple plot, and the beauty of it is watching that same plot over and over and over again and watching new ways for the animators to bring it to life. And with the movie, they kind of forget that simplicity. And it's this really complex, like, oh, Tom is actually being hired by a hotel employee who's not actually an employee to stop Tom so that this wedding for two characters that are really inaccessible and we don't care about goes well. And Jerry is just kind of vibing with his AirPods, and then is like, sometimes he's just kind of being a dick. Sometimes he's just kind of hanging out and trying not to die. But it's like it's way too complex for a movie about a cat trying to kill a mouse. And unfortunately, you spend like probably 60 or 70% of the movie with characters that aren't in the title. Which I don't know about you, but when I go to see a Tom and Jerry movie, I would kind of hope that I spend time with Tom and Jerry. And you're
not there for Collin Jost.
I was not there for Collin Jost, who's like introductory scene is him playing like 4D virtual golf on a hotel room screen and complaining about how he can't throw a wedding big enough. So
that's great character development.
And then like Chloe Grace Moritz's character is just like, she starts off as like your typical like peppy New York teen, like out there to, take on the world and live in the big city. And then she's also sometimes a con man, and then sometimes like that good-natured, like, I don't know, children's movie character. And so, unfortunately, yeah, you spend most of the movie with them, which really takes away from, Tom and Jerry. And then you really you don't even get a lot of opportunities for Tom and Jerry to do what they do best, which is chase each other. Like the climax of this movie involves just a giant cartoon tornado that you can't really tell what's going on inside of it. Like it's literally just a bunch of dust clouds spinning in a circle. And if that doesn't excite you, there's still 15 more minutes of the movie after that. It's not good. I can't recommend this. Just watch the clip from La La Land with Tom and Jerry in it and just leave it there. Don't do this to yourself.
Yeah, we had a rough week of movie watching, man. It's weird because so Tim Story directed Tom and Jerry, and I also watched this movie, but I gave up after like 30 minutes. So maybe I'll get back to it at some point. Maybe not, but like Tim Story directs this movie, and he's been around Hollywood for forever. He did the 2 Fantastic Four movies for Fox. He did those Think Like a Man movies with Kevin Hart. He did the Ride Along movies. He also did Shaft, the newest Shaft, not the good Shaft from the 70s, but the one with Samuel L. Jackson. Or I guess that doesn't even narrow it down because he's in multiple Shafts. The one that came out like 2 years ago. But he's just been around in Hollywood for the longest time. So I guess kudos to him, but it seems like he's more so like a director for hire type, where he'll just come in and say in the studios, hey, we got this Tom and Jerry movie, we need someone to just shoot the script, and he's like, I got you, fam, and he'll just do that. So it seems like he just is one of those guys who takes all the notes and just like makes the studio happy to make a movie. But hey, it's led to a very long career, so I guess you can't complain with those results.
This movie also feels weird because part of the thing with Tom and Jerry is they don't ever really interact with people. They're kind of in that, bringing it back to Peanuts, like in that Peanuts mode where you never really see the adults. So like Tom and Jerry, you'll occasionally get like, you'll see like the ankles of like the mom or the maid or something, but humans are pretty removed. So it feels, it's obviously very unbelievable in the sense that they're like bonking each other on the head and like the big boo boo. What do you call that? Like the big
I
like
don't know.
knot forms in their head and whatnot. But it feels pretty believable because like there no human ever really catches on. So it feels weird that you'd spend most of the movie with humans when they've never really been a part of these characters' stories, anyways. And it's also really disorienting because every other animal in this movie talks and talks a lot and talks way too much, except for Tom and Jerry. So it's really awkward when they're just like silent. Um, and then also trying to have a conversation with the human. So yeah, I can't really recommend this. There is a pretty good Joker gag featuring Droopy the dog, and like the opening sequence of the movie, which was pretty funny. That was pretty much the only time I laughed. And actually, Droopy was both times he appears was the only time I laughed. So talk about the most iconic character in this movie. It's Droopy the dog.
Wait, we buried the lead. This movie begins with pigeons breaking the fourth wall and singing "Can I Kick It?" and it's one of the most bizarre things you'll ever see in your life. I thought I had just I'd like fallen into the sunken place from Get Out when I was watching that first episode, that first part. I was like, what the fuck is happening? This movie is the weirdest thing.
Well, I was really worried when that Droopy the dog poster showed up as Joker. Like, I liked the gag that it was like this semi-obscure cartoon character from the 50s, like dressed up like the Joker with one of those like classic society taglines. So I was really worried they were gonna go with the Scoob approach and be like, oh, what if this is really like the beginning movie for all the Hanna-Barbera spin-offs? And so I'm glad they didn't do that and they at least had some restraint, but they should have had much, much more restraint with 85% of this movie.
Well, the movie that was trying to do the Hanna-Barbera universe was Scoob. You remember Scoob? That movie is, I feel like that and Tom and Jerry are of a piece where Warner Brothers was just sifting through all their properties. Like, hey, what are the kids like these days? What can we make? And it's like, hey, we got Scooby Doo and we got Tom and Jerry, and they're like, all right, go picture. And they just like went nuts. And there are two. I mean, I can't speak for the rest of Tom and Jerry, but from what you say, it sounds like it's the worst. But from the first 30 minutes of Tom and Jerry and all of Scoob, which I inexplicably watched, they're two of the most baffling studio productions of the past 2 years. They're both just unbelievably insane. Like, the end of Scoob ends with basically like the Hanna-Barbera Avengers, and it's the most insane thing you've ever seen in your life. So I hope that Warner Brothers stops this sometime soon, please, for my sanity.
Yeah, and I think like the biggest flaw is, at least with Scooby-Doo, like those have been stretched out into movies before, so you kind of see how you could make an hour and a half out of that kind of mystery. But like the old Tom and Jerry shorts are like 5-6 minutes a piece. Like, these are not stories that are supposed to play out over an hour. And so I understand why you'd be like, yeah, we need to bring in all these human characters to make it, more dynamic. But it just ends up taking the movie away from Tom and Jerry. To the point where it's like, why are these two cartoon characters even here? You could have just made a kids movie with Chloe Grace Moretz and Michael Pena and Ken Jeong, and it probably would have been pretty solid. But it is not.
Yeah, man, I can't get over the asshole shot in Jerry. It's still stuck in my head. We had a rough week
in Tom and Jerry. Believe it or not.
I was thinking of it when I was watching Cherry. It's interesting because, right, this is Tom Holland's big, I'm breaking away from the MCU. I'm no longer this young kid. I want to be this big, gruff actor type. And I'm thinking, because what are his two big movies outside the MCU are The Devil All the Time, which I liked I liked quite a bit. It came out on Netflix. It has some problems with it, but I think he's really good in it. And he also does Cherry. And these two movies are two of the most like grimy, like kind of non-super indie movies of the last year. So it seems like he's really trying to buck the trend of, hey, I'm Spider-Man, with like, hey, watch all this adult shit that I can do. Isn't this wild?
You're forgetting the impending Chaos Walking release at the end of this next week.
Oh yeah, that's right. He's in that too. Jeez. So I'm wondering what I mean, it still has yet to take full shape, but I'm wondering what his career outside of the MCU will be, because it seems like he's trying to shape his personality in a completely different way, and I don't know if it's quite taking hold yet.
Yeah, he also like talked about it this week where he's like in no rush to leave the MCU because his contract is technically up after Spider-Man No Way Home in December. But he's like, I'm not going anywhere. So he's still got some Marvel money to bank on for a while.
Well, yeah, because he's basically the new like headliner, right? Because we don't have Robert Downey Jr. We unfortunately don't have Chadwick Boseman anymore. He's basically the guy. So I feel like at this point, Marvel Studios is like, yeah, what do you want for each movie? You want 50 million? Sure, we can make that happen. So maybe he doesn't make the most artistically stimulating movies the next few years, but he's gonna make a shit ton of money. He's got the Uncharted movie coming out too. He's Nathan Drake, right?
Yeah.
So he's gonna be all over the place.
So yeah, that is some Tom Holland acting for you. But we'll go ahead and move on to what we've been watching in general. So fortunately, I think all of these movies we're about to talk about were much better than the new releases we watched this weekend. So I'll let you go ahead and dive in with your recent watches.
Yeah, I needed a bit of a palate cleanser, but I've been doing a weird little Keanu Reeves mini marathon recently. So a while ago, or I guess a week ago, I rewatched all of the original Matrix movies, which I don't know about you, but I feel like I kind of ride a little bit for 2 and 3 and rewatching them. It's been a minute, and I feel like they have really interesting stuff in them, and I would love to air my grievances for all the reasons why those movies are misunderstood. But anyway, so the second half of this marathon is I'm in the middle of rewatching all the John Wick movies, and yeah, newsflash: John Wick movies are really good. I watched the first one last night. It's been a minute since I've rewatched the first one, but it's just really, really good. And it's amazing. It's the John Wick franchise is one of the few actual surprises we've had in terms of big blockbuster franchises. Because there was a time when this movie was going to go straight to VOD, and Lionsgate was like, we don't really know what to do with this. It's Chad Stahelski's never directed a movie before. He was just a stunt guy for Keanu Reeves for so many years, along with David Leitch. And they didn't really know what to do with it. But then all of a sudden they're like, all right, we'll just put it out in theaters and see what happens. And obviously it's become one of the biggest non-MCU franchises since. But it's just fun watching because all of these movies have gotten bigger and crazier with each one. Like the budget on 2 and 3 gets bigger and bigger, and the stunts they do and all the crazy shit gets bigger and bigger as well. So you return to the beginning of this movie, and the first like 15-20 minutes of the original John Wick is just very depressing and sad, and just Keanu Reeves just misses his wife and gets the dog, and it's pretty emotional, honestly. And so when you look at all of these 3 movies, and I think 4 and 5, they're filming back to back, which is amazing for me, but just all of my interests there. But when you look back at this like emotionally charged, pretty like subdued intro to this world, it kind of sets all this in place because all these movies are basically happening right after each other. So like the second movie happens right after the end of the first one, then literally the third movie happens within like minutes of the second movie ending. So I feel like when people go back and revisit the first John Wick, I feel like it does color the rest of the movies with a greater like emotional undercurrent, because literally all John Wick wants to do is grieve and just like think about his wife and all these assholes just won't leave him alone. So yeah, it's just John Wick. It's really good. It's lovely.
Yeah, I think John Wick legitimately has gotten better every movie. And like the first 30 minutes of the third movie is just like my favorite action sequence because it's just insane. Like he's killing people with horses, he's killing people with books.
It's literally the most amazing thing ever. The first 30 minutes of John Wick 3 are pure cinema. It's beautiful.
It's
There's horses. They're picking the knives off the walls, throwing them at each other. It's the most amazing thing, and it's so funny because Chad Stahelski and David Leitch were like, basically they ran out of money on the first movie, which is why there's the weird kind of in the rain fight with Michael Nyquist at the end of that movie, because they tried to do something. I think they had like a bigger car chase thing in mind at the end of that movie, but they just ran out of stuff. So they were like, I don't know, John Wick, fight the fight the old dude, and then the movie was over. So in that sense, like the second John Wick is very much like, hey, we wanted to do all this cool stuff in the first movie, but we didn't have the money to do it. So now we do. So let's just do it again, but better. And you really do get that. It's one of the few movies that's like, it has all of the components of sequelitis, where it's like, let's do all of it again, but we have a bigger budget and more control to do all the things we wanted to. But it actually works. Like, there's so many sequels where that follow that same kind of guidance and just are terrible, and they're the worst things ever. But the John Wick 2 is just is amazing. One of my favorite scenes, maybe besides the horse sequence in John Wick 3, is in chapter 2 when Common and John Wick and Keanu Reeves are just like shooting. They're doing like the little like silencer shots with their like little pistols, like when they're walking through the subway. It's like one of the funniest things I've ever seen. But yeah, I'm looking forward to rewatching 2 and 3. But it's always nice going back to the first one, because I think it does have a really good emotional undercurrent to it. And it's Keanu. Keanu's the best. What a guy.
Yeah, I think it's like just the most pure like Hollywood franchise that we have right now. Like there's not a whole lot of like studio manipulation. Like you don't really hear anything about problems coming out of it, like production wise. Like they're just kind of quietly doing their thing. Everybody loves them, critics and and audiences alike when they come out. Like they're just the one thing that everybody can seem to get behind.
Yeah, it seems like I've listened to a few interviews with Chad Stahelski, and he's just a very passionate dude who says we're gonna get the cast together 6 months before we shoot so we can do all this crazy choreography, and that's why all the stunts look amazing. But yeah, they just work really hard. They get it done. It's cool. And then they built like the Continental lore is like some of the coolest stuff, and that feels so organic. And especially in the first movie where they have all this stuff built up and you have all the coins and it's just so great, and it all just makes sense, and it doesn't feel like dumb and overblown like a lot of lore building is in a lot of studio movies. It's just all of it feels so natural and great. It's a lot of fun. And the first movie too, it does the really good screenwriting trick of not only like having characters explain the backstory of your lead character before you see it, so like you automatically think, whoa, this dude's badass and he hasn't even punched anybody, but it also has the really good thing of people, like all the dialogue is written where they have a certain past with John Wick, so all of this feels like it's a new adventure. This is like the 15th time I've seen John Wick do this, so it feels like it's this really cool lived-in world that I think is really, in some ways, subtly built quite nicely. So it's just so cool. A while ago there was an announcement that they were going to make a Continental TV show, which just sounds like the coolest thing. I really hope that happens. I hope that's still a thing, because I would watch that so hard.
Yeah, and I think kind of on that note about that lived-in world, there are a lot of like characters that just come in and out, that don't have, like, oh, we need to, really build this person up so that, they have this massive character arc. But there are people that really just do serve the world that they're living in. So like John Leguizamo's character and Thomas Sadoski's character in the first two, I think, are good examples of that. So like Thomas Sadoski, I think he has the same line in 1 and 2 where he just like will show up because he's a cop. He's like, "You working again, John?"
Yeah, it's so good.
And then John will like say something, and then he'll just walk off, and like that's his purpose. But like it really helps build like the myth of John Wick and just the totality of this world.
Yeah, it's like, oh, they've done this probably 150 times. It's such smart screenwriting, and it's not minimalist, but it's just we're not overblowing this character. Like, this is just like another Tuesday for him at the John Wick household. It's And the entire movie is built on that, and then it creates this just amazing bit of like, yeah, this assassin underworld, it's been here for a while, and John Wick's been a big part of it. So you're just seeing the latest of 100 and however many episodes of it. It's just the best. I love these movies. I love them so much. I feel like for the years to come, I feel like all three of these movies, and hopefully 4 and 5 when those come out, are just going to be the movies I just rewatch the most. I think they're just so fun. And they have a lot of really good stuff to them. Obviously, the stunts are amazing, but I think the writing is really good. And Keanu Reeves is just, everyone likes Keanu Reeves. I mean, he's one of those guys, if you just don't like Keanu Reeves, I don't really know what we're doing. Like, he's like, that's just kind of a bad take, you know? So it's just, I think for the rest of my life, I'll just be like, yeah, John Wick, these movies are dope. Pop these in a few times a year. It's a great way to live a life. Just less cherry, more John Wick. It's the way to go.
I agree. I did not watch anything as violent this week, unfortunately. But I watched 2 really solid movies in particular. So the first one I want to talk about is All About Eve. So I picked this up at a President's Day Blu-ray sale like a week and a half ago. Actually picked both of these up through that because these are 2 fairly recognized movies that I wanted to get to. So with All About Eve, I really enjoyed because it was an actress, Betty Davis, who I'm not very familiar with. It was a movie that I wasn't very familiar with either. In my mental image of it, I just kind of expected another Sunset Boulevard. Fortunately, it was very, very different. But this is a really biting movie about Hollywood. And so, researching just like some of the production of this movie, and like Joseph Mankiewicz, who was the nephew of Mank from the hit movie Mank. Just talking about like how much of a slap in the face this movie really was to the industry. Because a lot of this movie is Betty Davis's character lamenting just on how the industry treats aging actors, and particularly how the industry treats women. So she's by no means an older woman. She's like maybe 45, I think, in the movie, because they state her age specifically at one point. So she's not an old woman, but she's like, I'm not 30 anymore. Like, and now nobody wants me. Like, I have the talent, and everybody's on board with me having the talent, but I don't have the looks, I don't have the body anymore, and so I'm just dead, basically. So there's the conflict of this movie is between her character Margot being that fading star and the up and comer Eve, since the movie is all about Eve. And just like how Eve is forcing her way into this spot because she's younger, and even if talent really isn't the issue, like the industry is more biased towards the up and comer because they're young. And so it's just a lot of Betty Davis's character reflecting on her legacy. And before we started recording, we were talking about how her character in particular really reminds me of Rick Dalton in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Because it's a lot of that similar sentiment of, I used to be this huge star. Look at all these things I've done, but like, what am I doing now? Who really cares what I'm up to now? I'm doing, like back alley plays in Minnesota in this movie, or episodes as the heavy in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And so I really thoroughly enjoyed this movie a lot.
Yeah, there's a certain strain of kind of older movies from earlier Hollywood where it's kind of amazing, like the ideas that they have in them. Because I think of Casablanca, which I watched for the first time like a few months ago, and it's just amazing how much of a critique of war that movie is, and it was made during World War II. Now, when you look at some of these movies that now, it's just like they just don't have the same teeth in what they're saying that a lot of these older movies do. Which I find really fascinating sometimes. But Yeah, All About Eve is one I haven't checked out, and I actually don't have a lot of experience with Betty Davis as well. But I do think it is cool when you do get that first glimpse into an actor and actress who has been built up in your mind's eye. Like I remember the first time I saw Humphrey Bogart in a movie, it was just like, whoa, this guy, I get it now, you know. So it is really cool whenever you get to rewatch or watch for the first time some of these classic things. It's just cool. It just really puts everything into perspective.
Yeah, and it's nice to really see that side of it, and it honestly kind of sucks a little bit, like how much those themes and kind of those complaints that she has in that movie, which came out in 1950, are still pretty relevant. Like, it
Yeah,
shouldn't be
you
that
watch that
easy.
and it's like, wow, we have done nothing.
It shouldn't be that easy to draw that comparison to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. You know, movies that are 60 years apart in creation, but it's like, no, they're struggling with the same issue because it hasn't, it's like gotten prettier, but it hasn't really changed. And that's actually a really good segue into the next movie I'm going to talk about, which is Do the Right Thing, which is a Spike Lee joint. It actually stars Spike Lee a lot more than a lot of his other movies do. But this movie was tough to watch for similar reasons, in the sense that this movie is 30 years old, and there are huge chunks of this movie that feel like something I've seen on the news like within the past year. And especially like the movie climaxes with some really heavy hitting commentary about like over policing of African American communities, and just like police brutality and police violence, and it just hits like extremely close to home for being a movie that came out 30 years ago. And I can't gush on either of these movies enough, for very different reasons, but Do the Right Thing just really struck a chord with me.
Yeah, Spike Lee is just one of those directors where I feel like we don't give him enough credit for how prescient he is. Like I feel he's always ahead of his time in the way that he talks about certain issues that come up in his films. Where, like, yeah, Do the Right Thing. It's it's like it's 40 or 30 years later, and it's literally what's happening. And that's just like a running theme through all of his movies. He's just, I mean, yeah, this guy is Spike Lee. He's going places.
He's got that dolly shot. Um, but yeah, it was really good, and I haven't seen a ton of Spike Lee. So I've seen what are probably considered his big four. So this movie, Malcolm X, which I just saw for the first time, uh, 2 or 3 weeks ago, when the Black Klansman and the Five Bloods, and I think he's like slowly becoming one of my favorite directors. He's definitely somebody I want to jump into more.
Yeah, he has a few that I love. He Got Game. He Got Game. I think is amazing. With Denzel, and it's one of those. I'm a big basketball fan, so when I'm not watching movies, I'm probably watching basketball. So I think that movie hits real home, and it has Ray Allen, who is all time Hall of Famer player, who's in that movie as well. His character's name is Jesus Shuttleworth, which is just hilarious. But he's really good in it. Spike actually finds a good performance out of him, which is really impressive. And it's cool because when they actually do basketball, it's like, oh, it's Ray Allen. He's one of the best shooters in the history of basketball. So he looks good while he does it. And Denzel played basketball in college, so when he gets to shoot, he actually looks pretty good as well. But yeah, that movie is really good. And I think that's another one where it's talking about like people in college using their likeness and be able to profit off their name, and it's like these are things that still aren't resolved today, and it's such a smart idea, and it really captures it so well. He's always ahead of its time. So I feel like there's a few guys like that. I feel like Steven Soderbergh is always like, we kind of pass along his movies, but then we look back at them 15 years later, and it's like, oh, these movies were really, really smart and way ahead of their time. Like we look at like Contagion now, and it's like, wow, that movie basically is COVID-19. And there's like his filmography is riddled with movies like that, where he's just a really smart filmmaker. But yeah, it's just Spike. He's the best. He's so good.
I also want to share what might be the most wholesome interview moment of all time. So this was from a written interview right before Defy Bloods was coming out, where a bunch of people on the internet were just sending in Q&As for Spike to answer. So Mike Leigh is a British director who directs a lot of like grimy London-y crimes. He's like he's very big in Britain is what I'm trying to say. But he's like the British crime guy. And so his question was, occasionally I get mistaken for you. Have you ever been mistaken for me? Because Mike Leigh and Spike Lee rhyme. And so Spike Lee's response, "What's up, Mike, my brother? I haven't had the honor yet. Peace and love." And it's just the most wholesome, like, little director exchange.
Yeah, it's just I like Spike is he's just one of those directors. His movies are gonna just live on for forever. It'll be like when we're old and like people will still be studying and talking about Spike Lee movies because they're just all of them are just so fascinating. There's a few I really want to catch up with too that are apparently really good. I've never seen Crooklyn, which is one I really want to watch. There's a bunch of them. Chirac is another one. He's just this really smart guy. I mean, in Black Klansman, there's just so much stuff going on in that movie and so many different ideas. It's just he's never one to shy away from anything. It just makes his movies that much more interesting.
I agree. He also had one of the best dance scenes of all time in Defy Bloods. So got to give credit to that one more time. But yeah, that is Spike Lee, and that is this week's episode of the MovieBabble Podcast. So we've got quite a month coming up. We got Ray and the Last Dragon coming up this week. We've got Coming to America, Chaos Walking, Sponge Out of Water, depending on where you live. So it's getting to be a busy month movie wise. So we'll be here talking about it. Remember, you can always check us out online at MovieBabble.com.